Welcome to Rye View's special four-part series on substance abuse. Substance abuse has become a critical concern in a countless number of communities, and our wonderful city of Rye has not been immune to its harmful and tragic outcomes. Our expert guest on this episode is clinical psychologist Dr. Pauline Jordan. Dr. Jordan has over 20 years of experience working with children, adolescents, and adults. Dr. Jordan has an office in Greenwich, Connecticut, and works with young children to young adults in the diagnosis and treatment of mental health concerns involving a variety of topics, including depression, anxiety, family life transitions, including moves and divorce, to name a few.
In this episode of Rye Views, Dr. Jordan explains how drugs and alcohol affect the brain of an adolescent child, how drugs can feel so rewarding but can also cause permanent damage to a developing brain, how nobody starts out planning to become addicted. It starts as fun and recreational until the tipping point, and then one becomes hooked when the drugs choose you. Dr. Jordan gives us first-hand insight on the physical and emotional aspects of addiction. Who is at risk? Signs to look for. We thank Dr. Jordan for joining us on Rye Views and her invaluable input.
So we're sitting here today with Dr. Pauline Jordan. So welcome, Pauline. Would you tell us a little bit about yourself?
So I'm a clinical child psychologist, and I've been in practice about 20 years. I have an office in Greenwich, and I see kids through to the age of young adults for diagnosis and treatment of different mental health concerns, depression, anxiety, helping kids and families with major life transitions, moves, divorce, things like that.
Across the spectrum. So pertinent to what we're talking about today, could you tell us how do drugs affect the brain?
Well, it's an area of research that is huge right now. We're learning more and more all the time, but a very simple picture of it would be that there's a part of our brain, the limbic system, that's deep within the brain, and the limbic system controls pleasure and reward. And what happens is that our brain produces just naturally different neurotransmitters, like dopamine, for instance. And when we're doing something we enjoy that's pleasurable, like hanging out with friends, listening to music, eating, taking a walk in nature, our brain produces dopamine that's produced by by neurons, and then it's absorbed by other cells in the brain, and the feeling of pleasure is produced. And it's very rewarding. And with anything that's pleasurable and rewarding, we want to do it more. We want to do it again. What happens with drugs is drugs like opiates, marijuana, heroin, stimulants, is that they flood the brain with this dopamine or mimic dopamine. The brain starts to absorb it, and we have a feeling of pleasure, of well-being. It's very rewarding. We do it over time, regularly, and the brain actually starts to change, structurally change, and we start to produce less dopamine just naturally. And people that have started to regularly use drugs will find that they're now flat in their mood, that things that used to be pleasurable or rewarding, not so much anymore. And they start looking to the drug to just get that normal feeling back, not even a high anymore, but just a feeling of any kind of pleasure. And the research is showing that with regular drug use, the brain changes sometimes permanently.
So let me ask you, so if you're changing your brain and you're developing this tolerance, obviously, what is it that you think first sets you out to say, let me have this drug? If you were not feeling flat and you were feeling regular, why do you think kids even go to that?
Right. Well, because nobody starts out planning to become addicted. So there's some kids that are doing it because it's fun. I mean, we have to be honest about that. These drugs affect our sensory perception, give us a feeling of pleasure. Some kids are looking much more to novel, interesting sensory experiences. They're not doing it to escape stress or to dull distress. it's really recreational and it starts out fun. The very insidious, sneaky thing about addiction is that you don't even know when it's going to happen that you have now become hooked, and it's what you're thinking about all day. When can you do it? Where are you going to find the drugs? What started out being, oh, a fun thing I'm going to do once or twice, do it more and more, and there's a tipping point. And it's different for each person. So if maybe you've partied with friends a few times, when one of them or one of you or you become addicted, it's going to be different, and you can't predict. That's what's so very scary, is you think in the beginning you're in control, you're making these choices, and then there's a day when you're not. It's chosen you.
Is that a physical thing inside
It's
your brain?
a physical thing. I mean, addiction also has social and emotional aspects, but there's a physiological addiction where you are craving it just to feel like you can get through the day. And it's certainly not how anyone starts out.
As parents, you know, I guess we're all flaying away here trying to figure out, how do you talk to your kids? I mean, at different ages, I assume, like with the young kids and the teenage, how would you address both of those age groups in terms of before they start on drugs?
Right. Well, I mean, I think it's important to put this into a developmental context. So adolescents, their normative developmental tasks are to develop emotional maturity, emotional self-regulation, develop meaningful relationships outside the family, start to separate and be more independent from their parents. So you can imagine how seeking novel, interesting experiences, including drugs, could fit into the context of a normal developmental progression. But I think with kids we have to think about risk factors as well as protective factors. Mm-hmm. So the kids that are going to be more prone to seeking it out, whether it's because it's fun or because they're under a lot of stress, I think we have to think about who's most at risk. I think that's what you're asking.
Yes. Can you, do you think you can identify that at a younger age? Can we start looking into it in, say, elementary school and start talking about to children about something in some way? Can we introduce them?
So I think what we've learned about what puts kids more at risk is kids that have an undiagnosed mental health issue from a young age, depression or anxiety. Children that are feeling socially ostracized, that they're not connecting to peers. Children who have parents that are also heavily using drugs or alcohol and modeling that. When there's very low parental supervision. Children that are really struggling at school and don't feel that they can meet the challenges put in front of them, that they don't have enough supports.
So you have your typical, what we defined, I guess, is the child who screams out that they're in, you know, these are some of the signs that we can all know, but then you also have just a regular kid walking down the street who's just looking for a good time.
Right.
And
A bit of fun.
Just a bit of fun. That's right.
it's a lot of kids to cover. It's a lot
That's
to
right.
know.
That's right. And I think our audience, when we talk to kids, they're going to be very diverse. And they're going to be coming at drug use from many different perspectives and with different needs. And so I think we have to acknowledge that some kids are doing it just for fun. Some kids are doing it to numb distress or as an escape.
One of the things you had mentioned earlier when we spoke was this emotional awareness.
Right. Right. So a protective factor for kids is going to be learning to manage strong emotional experience. We call it emotional regulation. And certainly the younger we start teaching kids, the better, but certainly as a therapist, I feel like you're never too old to learn better self-control, better emotional regulation. And what that means is when we have a strong emotional reaction, whether it's frustration or worry or anger, how quickly can we bring ourselves back to sort of centered, steady state so that we can problem solve in an adaptive way or let it go? With very young kids, we talk about something called the turtle technique, right? So you have a strong reaction, you say, okay, like a turtle, bring your head into your shell, 3 deep breaths. Okay, now you can make your plan. What would you like to do and say? You can do that really at any age. Deep breaths before.
So you're associating that to really a overreaction to something or a big reaction to something? Is it a happy reaction to something as well?
Well, there's some, we all
Just
have
taking a moment, is it?
taking a moment, and to recognize what happens in our bodies when we have strong feelings. We call it a fight or flight reaction. And some people's fight or flight reaction to triggers is instantaneous and huge, and some people are much more laid back by nature, and it's a smaller little blip. And I think we learned that about our kids, who are the big reactors and who are just more laid back.
What can you tell about those 2 people? I'd love to know that because I got some of each of those.
Right.
What do
Right.
you, right? I mean, don't you have a, we all know,
Everyone, yeah.
we all know. Is any one of them more prone to, more apt to?
The big reactors, I think, can be more prone. But you know what? Kids that are very laid back may be the ones that are seeking more interesting, novel sensory experiences. So, you know, I think
wanna
both,
bottle it up.
yeah, both types of kids can be at risk.
When our teenagers are more hanging out with their friends and more have an ear to their friends and not so much to their parents or family,
Right.
how do you connect with them? How do you kind of, without being, oh, Mom, I've heard it before, you know, how do you talk to them about this stuff and like lend awareness about drugs in general or alcohol or any kind of
Right.
substance abuse without them zoning out?
And it's hard because as researchers and parents, what we've learned is that the adolescent brain is like it's a perfect storm. They are, as part of their normal developmental trajectory, they're going to be seeking out new experiences. They're going to want to be with their peers. And what we've learned is that their sense of risk is they really underestimate risk when they're with a group. And they also have more pleasure from novel experiences. So it's like a perfect storm to try drugs. But if we keep saying that to teens about their brain developing, they don't believe it. Oh, I'm using my judgment, Mom, back off, I'm making good choices. So it's going to be, I think, more being a good listener. Right? You want to create situations in an environment where they'll just talk. And you're not going to judge. There's not going to be shame. You're going to listen. And our parental instincts, I think, are to rush in and problem solve and give advice and oh no, but you're going to practice just listening. Maybe then you're going to circle back in another conversation with some guidance. But you want the information to keep flowing. You don't want them to clam up. So it's finding those moments of just listening without commenting.
So finding those moments is an interesting thing because people always say, we don't have dinner anymore together where I'm basically not driving. He's got his own license or, they're going from sporting event. I'm just watching them now. I'm not even going there and they don't have them in the car as a
Right.
captive audience.
Right.
Where are we going with that? What can we do?
It's very hard.
It's very hard.
I think that you try to offer experiences that might be fun. So let's go take a walk on the beach. Let's drive up to, let's hike the Notch up in Massachusetts. Let's go do something, maybe just for the day, so you can get some one-on-one time.
Force the family dinners.
You force it.
Yep.
I mean, ideally, you can have started these dialogues when they're very young, and you can talk about managing stress. So you're labeling emotions. You're talking about the nuance, bittersweet, not just happy, sad. You're modeling yourself. You've got them in the car for 5 minutes, and you do sort of have a monologue, because they're not going to give you much information maybe, but you talk about, oh gosh, I had a work meeting today, and I was so worried, and this is what I did, and you know what, and you just talk out loud. So you're modeling problem solving, and you're taking any shame away from having those full range of emotions.
And not being perfect the whole time.
Not being
'Cause
perfect.
no one is perfect the whole time, right?
Right, and there's no emotion that cannot be understood. It's what you then do with it, and teaching kids that feelings are separate than your actions. And you do have a choice, but you got to de-escalate, you got to breathe.
Feelings are different from your actions. That's a very interesting. How do you relate? How do you give that to them? That feeling. I mean, you can have a certain feeling about something, but
You don't have to act on it, and that all feelings can make sense in some way, that you can understand why they'd feel that way. And then, well, what do you want to do about that? You've got choices here. You're not going to act in the height of the adrenaline rush of that big emotion. What do you want to do? But the feeling itself, there's no shame about.
It's always darkest before the dawn, right? I can hear my mother in her head saying, "It's always darkest. Getting that good night's sleep, right? Wake up.
Right.
That's very good." The
Yeah.
emotion first, and then put it in the spot. But acceptance of it and tolerance that everybody's emotion is okay.
And that's part of learning emotional regulation skills is tolerating distress. That, and this is a great thing to model as parents. So we've had a stressful work week. We're not going to say, I need a drink. It was stressful, so what am I going to do? I'm going to listen to some music, I'm going to take a walk, I'm going to hang out with my family. We're modeling how to manage our own stress and teaching kids that there's toxic stress, but there's also stress that is productive, that's adaptive. And you need some stress to feel motivated, to want to achieve those goals. And that working hard and experiencing that stress, living through it, it pays off, and it has its own intrinsic rewards, and that we don't have to look outside for the reward for the hard work.
Okay.
On another tack, say there's a kid who may be using drugs. Say drugs, because they're more identifiable, aren't they, than, say, alcohol or opiates, right?
Well, opiates are a drug.
Right.
So,
But in terms of how would you recognize that a kid's using drugs?
how would you recognize?
What are some of the basic signs?
The basic signs would be more isolation, that they're not enjoying things as much as they used to. You look at their eating, their appetite, their sleeping, their hours.
What happens to all those? The appetite becomes decreased?
Well, it depends on the drug.
Okay.
But it's a
Right.
change. The sleeping, again, it's a lot or a little, it's a change.
It's change.
Um,
Okay.
And you keep track of your own prescription medication. You keep it very closely guarded. I think when our kids are young, we give them their antibiotic if they have an ear infection. At a certain point, they start being more independent. Oh, did you take your ampicillin? Same thing with kids that have prescriptions for something like ADHD or for depression or anxiety that's being properly treated by a psychiatrist. But they've got now a bottle of medication that they're giving them the responsibility of taking it and holding it themselves, I think is overwhelming, because we know that in high school kids are asking each other, can I buy one of your Adderall? It's a lot of peer pressure to share.
Now, some people might argue and say, okay, I'm sending them to college with this drug. I want them to be able to learn how to do it on their own. I've heard both sides of that argument, right? And then you're saying, it is overwhelming for them. How about we dole it out until it's necessary? Where do you find the happy medium for that?
Depends on the kid.
Okay.
I think that what psychiatrists are starting to do for kids that are going off to college is saying, I will, let's have you take a prescription of 3 weeks, and I want to hear from you, want to talk. And then they'll give them the next 3 weeks until the trust is built and the parents are confident that everything's going okay. That you monitor it very closely. And I think psychiatrists are learning with college-age kids, can't just send them off. And sometimes the discussion is, maybe the summer before college, we're going to try weaning you off and using other strategies to manage, whether it's your attention or your anxiety, and then we'll see how it goes. It's.
What about using those strategies before they go to drugs? Are you finding that people are trying to do that before they go to the medication enough?
Well, enough, probably not enough,
Okay.
but I think they really need to, because there's so much research about evidence-based treatment, cognitive behavioral therapy, helping kids understand their own emotional experience, their own triggers, what gets them revved up, learning strategies to de-escalate, adaptive conflict resolution, also learning what helps them feel calm, you know, whether it's music or walks or exercise. And then you try that kind of therapy and learning strategies where you help the child really be part of the process, that they have to be on board and a real active participant. You don't do therapy to a child, you really demystify for them what they're learning to work on. And then medication is then the next step. And some kids absolutely would benefit from medication. I think you do it in a stepwise fashion.
Almost a last resort type thing?
I wouldn't necessarily say last resort, but I think the child, the adolescent, the adult needs to know that the medication isn't going to solve it. You still need to learn how to manage strong feeling and problem solve, and the medication can help you be more able to access those skills. So it's not an either or.
Sounds like that same education would work in schools if we instituted that now, or in elementary or middle or high school, with drug use, just regular.
Well, I think with drug use, and also just talking about emotional mental health, to destigmatize, talking about anxiety and depression, and talking about all of that without shame, without judgment, from a very early age.
Do you think the digital world is helping or hindering in terms of, you know, kids have their, you know, eyes on the screens the whole time, or are there apps that actually give them coping skills to calm down, take a breath, move on, identify?
Well, both for sure is going on. And what the research is showing us about video games is that they actually affect the brain like drugs. That playing video games, you can get addicted to video games and surges of dopamine, and that's why, you know, when you ask a kid, okay, you need to turn that off, and they're in the middle of whatever, they're like, it feels like a physical assault, and it's because they become addicted. So
do you think that is, if they are showing signs of addicting to it, that they have that type of personality?
Possibly.
Wow.
And to educate kids very young about what that feels like, to not be able to stop, to have this craving, to not be able to feel at peace unless they can do something, to educate them about that internal experience, whether we're starting with video games or drugs.
So what would you say to them? Like,
Right.
so say a kid is bang in the middle of, I don't know, some video game master thingy, and you want to call them for dinner. But they
Right.
can't, because, I mean, or it's the drug, whatever,
Right.
the coping. What are the words that you would say to them?
Well, not in the middle of it, because it's going to be a temper tantrum.
Right.
But I think some education about, did you know that video games actually change your brain? What? No way. Well, let me tell you about it. Let me explain
There's
what's
been
happening.
research.
There's research, there's brain imaging, and even though you're only 7, you know what? You can become addicted, and let me tell you what that looks like. So when I say to you, it's time to turn that off, it's going to feel physically impossible. And you're not wrong. I understand why you're enraged, because your whole body is screaming, no, no, no. A lot of video games don't have natural stopping points. It's like continual.
Because they want to suck you in.
And it's very effective.
Can you use it as a tool to self-regulate, to teach them how to self-regulate? Can you
Well,
actually, I'm just trying
yeah,
to, we already have them in our
I
house,
would
so I'm trying
say
to figure out.
it's a maladaptive tool, but kids are in some ways self-medicating with video games, because it engages them, their heart rates de-escalate, it's calming. But there are, as you asked about apps that are
Right,
actually
yeah,
positive, especially for kids that love their technology. There's a great app called Breathe 2, the number 2, Relax. And I think it's actually a free app, and it was developed for the military, for vets to manage their own post-traumatic stress and their own high reactivity. And you can pick the visuals, and it teaches you slow and steady breathing. And it monitors your progress, and the kids, they can hold it themselves, and they can watch, and they can pick their music, and they see these soldiers. The training is showing these, very fit soldiers learning to use strategies to calm themselves. So
We could all do with a bit of that.
Oh
couldn't we?
my
Yeah,
goodness, that
breathe
sounds
to
like
relax. I might go home
and get that,
yeah. Tomorrow.
right.
Okay.
Because
so-
what we know is that if when we have a strong reaction, our bodies go into fight or flight mode, which means we're flooded with adrenaline, and our bodies, to protect ourselves, are either ready to fight off the danger and muscle tension, and you see our kids with tight fists, or we're trying to flee, escape strategies. Neither are adaptive, but we can't make any plans until we can de-escalate and bring our adrenaline back down, bring
so
our
it
heart
looks
rate
like
down.
Breathing. It
Breathing.
looks like calming, getting in touch with our emotions. Some other things we've learned today from Dr. Pauline. We want to thank you for coming.
Thank
being
you
on the
very
show.
much.
It was
It's all been
really
very helpful.